The Portuguese language is one of the most spoken languages in the world, ranging of course from its native Portugal, although there are far more speakers in the South American country of Brazil, as well as various countries in Africa which speak Portuguese or a creole based on Portuguese, as well as several places in Southeast Asia as well. This means that there are around 270 million, anywhere between that figure and 230 million speakers of Portuguese, meaning that it either just is or just isn't in the top 10 most spoken languages in the world. This is called in Portuguese El Mundo Lusófono. That is the world of the Portuguese speakers. But you'll notice that the Lusophone world, this word to describe Portuguese speakers, does not sound at all like the English Portuguese. So in this video, I want to find out, why are Portuguese speakers called Lusophones? The ultimate etymology of Lusophone is from Latin, and of course Latin is the ancestor of the modern Portuguese language, as well as pretty much all the languages that are still spoken on the Iberian Peninsula, which I discussed in this video. Now, to get to the heart of what Lusophone means, we have to break it down into its two name elements. So let's first take a look at the element of Luso, which we find. Now, this is from the name that was given to a region that largely comprised of what is today Portugal, as well as some parts of neighboring Spain, which is Lusitania. Now, this Lusitania is derived from the name of the people that lived there during the Roman period, the Lusitanians, or the Lusitani, as they would be called in Latin. So to find out the etymology of Lusophone, we have to look at Lusitania, which means we now need to look at the etymology of Lusitani and what these people were called. I spoke about these peoples and various others from the Iberian Peninsula during the Iron Age and the Roman period in this video, but the Lusitani were one of these tribes that were living in what is today Portugal during this time. They're described by Diodorus Siculus as those who are called Lusitanians are the bravest of all Cimbri. This is rather interesting because it says that the Lusitanians are essentially a sub-branch of another group that are the Cimbri. Now, a lot has been written about the Cimbri, and interestingly enough, they may actually have originated in the Jutland Peninsula, so what is today Denmark and part of northern Germany, which at times was called the Cimbrian Peninsula. And that, of course, is the homeland of the Germanic peoples. So this has led to some speculation that perhaps the early Lusitani were a Germanic-speaking people. But the jury still isn't out about whether the Cimbri themselves were Germanic. Several of their kings have names that seem to end in Rix, which would be a Celtic form rather than a Germanic form. And the majority consensus appears to be that the Lusitani were not a Germanic-speaking people based on place name evidence and the various names that we have of their leaders, such as Viriatus, but instead that they were a Celtic-speaking people, or perhaps a Celt-Iberian people, which I explained. In some other texts, they are described as being the peoples that had lived in Oestriminis, and this Oestriminis is a term that describes the extreme west. Now, we can read about this in an old poem. This is a rendering in Latin, of course, called the Ora Maritima. So if we take a look at the stanzas 144 to 155, we read that, "Back after the places we spoke of above, there opens a great bay filled with water, all the way to Ophiusa. Back from the shore of this place to the inland water, through which I said before that the sea insinuates itself across the land, and which they call Sardum. The journey lasts for 7 days on foot. Ophiusa extends its side, being as large as you hear the island of Pelops lying in the territory of the Greeks is. This land was originally called Oestriminis by those who inhabited the Oestriminian countryside and the region. Much later, the serpent chased away the inhabitants and gave the now empty land its name." While the text was written in the 4th century AD, it's possible that it was borrowing from a now lost text going right the way back to the 6th century BC, so a very long time before. In any case, it encodes a kind of myth about the far west, at least from the Mediterranean perspective, of the world, which would be Portugal, and that serpents had come and chased the inhabitants away from the land, but that was ultimately where the name came from. So that's an interesting bit of history there. We get Strabo, another of the Roman writers, who does describe the Lusitani as being a Celtic people among several other Celtic peoples in the Iberian Peninsula, and that seems the most likely. So where does the name of the Lusitani come from? Well, there are several theories for this. One, which is quite popular but isn't incredibly backed by many serious etymologists, is that it is from Lusus, which may be a Romanized version of the Celtic name of Lugus or Lugos, which I talked about in this video, one of the Celtic deities who gave his name to Lugo and several other places in the ancient world, such as Lugdunum and others. If we return to the Ora Maritima, we might get another clue as to the name of these peoples. This is if we look at the verses 602 to 608, we see that the ridge of Setius stretched up to Tafrus, since its foot spread over a wide area. By way of explanation, the Rhodani tribes called the marsh next to the river Tafros. The Iberian land and the rugged Ligies are separated by the channel of this river. Here, a rather simple town and slight in its population is the city of Polygium. It's possible here that this Ligies, again being geographically situated in roughly the right area, this may also have given the Latin Lucis if this was standardized into Latin. So it's possible that this is where the Lusitanian part of that word comes from. How about then the second part? Well, some have theorized that this comes from a Celtic root that has to be reconstructed, which is tan. This would relate to tribe or people. And we can actually see this in the English word tanistry, which describes the clan hierarchy of various of the Gaelic and Irish tribes as they were encountered. And this, of course, is borrowing itself from a similar word, a cognate, in many of the Celtic languages, the Guadelic Celtic languages from Britain and Ireland. So we have there the Irish, the Scots Gaelic, and the last one there, which should be the Manx version of the word. So then we can get from this to a Celtic root, which is tyne, which would indicate an area of land, which would correspond with the Latin tania, as we find in a lot of place names such as Britain, which was Britannia. We have Aquitaine, which was Aquitania for a long time, and then we would add Lusitania to that row there, so that we have at first the name of the people, probably based on a Celtic word for themselves or for something in the area, followed by perhaps the Latinized version of a tyne, which would be a Celtic word for an area of land belonging to a tribe. This would be more distantly related to another Indo-European root, which would be Stan, this coming in through the Indo-Iranian branch of the Indo-European languages, which has given us such words as Pakistan, Uzbekistan, Afghanistan. That stan at the end of the word would then be related to the Latin of Tania. So Lusitania, whatever its origin, became the name of the province that was roughly contiguous with central Portugal, as well as a chunk of western Spain as well during the Roman period. Now, even though the Romans would eventually pull out of the Iberian Peninsula, and though the languages continued, Lusitania in that form did also continue as a name in its own right, often in antiquarian circles later on. So this is something that we see all over Europe, really, when we have the various names that go back to the Roman period, such as Britannia, Batavia, Germania, Gaul, Hispania, Iberia. Many of these names that were used in the Roman period and are derived from Latin, even if they borrow from other languages in the first place, they continue to be used in a learned or kind of classical, neoclassical way as the centuries go on. So that's one of the reasons why the first Portuguese colony in what would become Brazil was called Nova Lusitânia, because this would be referring back to Lusitania as the Romans called it. This is very similar to, for example, why Nova Scotia is also rendered in Latin rather than being called New Scotland or something similar to that. So that's rather interesting that the name continues and is also brought over to the New World. So what about the second part then? We obviously have the phone. I mean, this comes from the Greek phone, which simply means voice. So therefore we get the language of Lusitania. Lusophone becomes Portuguese. This is very similar to the way that it's done with other languages. So English speakers are Anglophones, again going back to Anglia, the Latin for England. We also, of course, have Francophones for French, going back to Francia, and of course saxophones. Those are the ones that speak Low German. So we have that there. Alright everyone, thank you very much for watching this video. It was a little bit on the quick side, I suppose, because I wanted to get a video up this week because I hadn't yet prepared one. Now this week I've been very busy because I actually organized and hosted a conference at the university where I study on pre-Christian beliefs in Germanic Northern Europe. Now whilst the conference was going on, I managed to record all the lectures that we gave on various different topics that you can see on the screen there, and I would like to upload these as the weeks go on, perhaps uploading them on Wednesdays alongside my normal style of video for the viewers to hopefully enjoy. Now let me know in the comments below if you're interested in seeing these lectures go live on YouTube, or if you would like to see it as a whole conference in one long video, then let me know about that. But just to mention that they will be being published as the weeks go on. So thank you all very much for watching this video about why speakers of Portuguese are called Lusophones. We've had a very good response to the video on Arabic Afrikaans and why some of the first Dutch that was written down in South Africa was written in the Arabic script, and a lot of people said they'd be interested in more videos about Afrikaans. That's something I'd really like to do and go into some depth for, so I'll take the time to do that and maybe look at the various languages that have influenced Afrikaans and how it developed and creolized, and if that's a good theory for it or not at some point in the future. But anyway, thank you all very much for watching. Please give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed. If you're new, don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you soon.